Hi, I'm Lisa Dahl, National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. Welcome to Getting Healthy Without Rules. This show is about understanding the things that impact your wellness and finding ways to improve it. In this show, we take a non-diet, no-rule approach to health and wellness. Health and wellness is a moving target. We all have different needs and opportunities to improve it. This approach allows you to make the best choice with the information you have right now. It helps you to be present, flexible, and resilient. In addition, I support you in moving from judgment to curiosity and offering yourself self-compassion. It's time we're all a little kinder to ourselves. Today's episode is about acupuncture, addiction, and eating disorders. Eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder are increasingly recognized as complex mental health conditions with addictive components, sometimes stemming from underlying trauma. Driven by a web of psychological, emotional, and social factors, these disorders manifest in unhealthy behaviors related to nourishment, exercise, and body image. Though not universally cured by any one treatment, a multifaceted, trauma-informed approach can help address root causes and disrupt disordered eating patterns. Treatment usually involves some combination of therapy, nutrition planning, medication assistance, mindful practices, and support groups. Full recovery is possible, but requires a commitment to unlearning and rewiring addictive thoughts and actions. Eating disorders affect millions worldwide, though they are still misunderstood as simple lifestyle choices rather than the complex mental illnesses that they are. Today we'll discuss using acupuncture to treat eating disorders, as it offers a holistic, drug-free method to rebalance the body and mind. Acupuncture is a form of traditional Chinese medicine that involves inserting thin needles into specific points on the body. These points are believed to be connected to energy pathways or meridians that flow throughout the body. By stimulating these points, acupuncture can help balance energy flow and promote healing. There is some evidence that acupuncture can be helpful for people with eating disorders. A 2010 study found that acupuncture was effective in reducing anxiety and perfectionism in people with eating disorders. Another study in 2017 found that acupuncture was associated with improvements in the quality of life in people with eating disorders. The exact mechanism by which acupuncture helps with eating disorders is not fully understood. However, it is thought that acupuncture may help to reduce stress, improve mood, regulate appetite. Acupuncture may also help to improve the body's ability to heal itself. While not a cure for eating disorders, acupuncture can be a helpful complementary therapy, especially when combined with talk therapy, mindfulness, and nutritional counseling. Before we begin to unpack the excruciating and isolating topic of eating disorders and addiction, please note that we will use the words fat or larger bodied. For example, you can be in a fat body and accept your body. We use these words as simple descriptors without judgment. Fat is simply another adjective, like thin, and it is up to us to remove the stigma and the negative connotation that society and diet culture have created. As always, remember to consult your medical team before starting any new treatments such as acupuncture, as discussed on this show. Today, we dive into the addictive nature of eating disorders, using acupuncture to support the treatment of eating disorders, understanding trauma-informed care, and body image distress and the role that body dysmorphia and dysphoria play in eating disorders. Be sure to stay until the end for this week's healthy practice to help reduce stress. I am excited to introduce today's expert guest, Stephanie Mattrey. Stephanie has a bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in creative writing from Westchester University in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and a master's degree in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine from Yosan University in Los Angeles, California. Stephanie excels at understanding people and meeting them wherever they are in the healthcare journeys. Her warm nature complements her ability to harness the science of acupuncture in treating and managing many complex illnesses. She is especially passionate about women's health, eating disorders, PTSD, and addictions. On the personal side, Stephanie loves her job and is most grateful and humbled to be a mother of 3 amazing daughters and a wife to her supportive husband, Jack. Together, they raise their kids in Western Massachusetts and gallivant all over New England, cheering for them as they race with the USA competitive swim circuit. In her off time, she helps coach the local swim team with whom her daughters compete. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
I'm excited to dive into this topic. It's one that is misunderstood and often brushed under the rug.
Yes.
Because people don't know what to say or what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you become an expert in eating disorders and acupuncture?
Well, the former was more of a default by life experience. I was raised in a really lovely home. I have two wonderful parents, yet I was abused by someone that I lived with in my home in a way that was not apparent. No one knew, and it was not physical. It was all emotional, psychological. It was very torturous. And so as a young child, my reality got distorted by this person on purpose, and I was constantly confused. I didn't know who said what or what the truth was. I had no grounding or basis for my reality, and I couldn't quite explain it to my parents. I would try to go to them, but they couldn't put their finger on it. What are you talking about, Steph? And so I sort of isolated myself, and in order to construct a reality for myself that felt grounding enough, I found starvation. I knew that I could control what went in my mouth or what didn't, and that was the only way I could feel safe. And so that sort of developed into full-fledged anorexia when I was 11. For 2 years, I just wasted away, and people noticed, but I think the diet culture in this society kind of looks at anyone, whether they're a kid or not, and if they've lost weight, it's congratulations, and
it's revered.
Yes, and so that was fuel for me. That was all I needed, and so I was also an athlete, and I coupled the starvation with the constant moving, and I counted everything. I mean, I can to this day tell you how many calories are in everything. And that just became all-consuming, but again, it kept me grounded in what I felt was my reality and my safety. It's how I was able to cope with what was going on at home. And then after 2 years, I decided I just couldn't starve myself anymore, but I was so terrified to eat. And I didn't know what I looked like. I had such horrible dysmorphia. I had seen a few professionals, and one woman said that she was like, if you want to be a mom, you need to stop doing this. And she was so cold about it. I was 12, 13. And so I stopped starving myself and started eating, but it was so terrifying for me that I found bulimia. I was home alone a lot. I was a latchkey kid. I had school and then home and then sports practices, and parents were working. So I experimented a lot, and I got really good at hiding this secret. And so long story short, it sort of became my self-medication from a young age, and I carried that with me into my adulthood. And, kind of off and on, just phases of horrible relapse and recovery. And I think nothing's linear in this. Life happens.
No.
And so I just continued, and it's been about almost 30 years. So I am in recovery, and every day again is just a new day and an opportunity to live in recovery and not disease. And I'm very, very blessed that I have the family that I have now. But as the years have gone by, I've become an expert on how the mechanisms of the mind work in this, how I lie to myself and believe that and sort of perpetuate the cycle, and then how to interrupt it as well. I got really good at learning what works and what doesn't work. A lot of trial and error. And so now when I see people that struggle with this, I know I can read them really easily because they fit in certain categories that I've made up in my mind. Like, oh, they're like this. I don't really judge. It's just more, okay, how am I going to approach this patient? What am I going to do for them? Some are more heady, some are more physical. So I use all that in my treatment of them. And I find it, finally, I'm able to say that it's a huge blessing that I've gone through all that.
Well, first, thank you for sharing your story. And there's so many stories out there that everybody's story has meaning, and it's it's helpful to know that you are not alone and your story is your personal story. And you have been able to turn that into a passion. And how does that correlate with finding acupuncture?
Oh, yes, I didn't answer that part. So finding acupuncture, I've always loved science. I've just science and art, actually, which are kind of opposing forces, I guess, that stigma-wise. And I was in college and I studied psychology, which I loved, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't really inspired to go to grad school, and I needed one more elective in my senior year, and I took alternative medicine, and this acupuncturist came in and needled my ears, and I sat in class with these needles in my ears. I was like, what is this? And I couldn't believe the effect it had. I was procrastinating on this huge paper I had to write, and that day I went home and wrote the whole 30-page paper, and I was like, that was not just a fluke, like that something's there. And so I started researching schools, and I started learning about the medicine, and I said, I think this is really going to be fun for me. And it's such a beautiful marriage of art and science, because there's not one way to treat any one condition. You get to really find your niche of how you work, and there's so many different methods of acupuncture that I felt like I was able to be creative and still pay attention to the science and the medicine. And it's full medical school, it's no joke. So that was a lot, but I loved it. So yeah.
It's amazing how you were able to it kind of landed in your lap.
Yeah.
And you were able to see that for what it was.
Yes.
And followed it, and it's just turned into all your hopes and dreams coming into one.
It has, yes.
So what is acupuncture and how does it work? You're like, yeah, I've got these needles in my ears. Well, what does that have to do with anything?
I like to say to new patients, it's weird. Like, who does that? Who's going to think about putting needles in their body? So it's ancient. It's about 3,000 years old. There's diversity of thought about who started it, but I studied traditional Chinese medicine. There's Korean acupuncture, there's Japanese acupuncture, so they all have like little tweaks of how they go about it, but basically the general gist of all of them is that the body is an energetic being, and that is true. We are electric. We have electricity impulses in our bodies that create a heartbeat, that create blood flow, pulses, nerves. All of that is electricity. And so what you are accessing with a needle is that. And so there's different points on the body that do different things, but what I've learned over the years is that they're connected neurologically in different ways. So there are things called dermatomes, which are just different areas on the body that are agreed upon in Western medicine that sort of feed into the spinal nervous system. So if I were to needle a part on the front side of the stomach, I could talk to the liver a little bit because it's connected to that nerve that's feeding the liver. And so there's that. The metaphor is that the energy is traveling through all these meridians, and the needles are kind of connecting with that. But what's actually happening is that the needles are creating a nervous system response. And so the body as one piece reacts to that response, if that makes sense.
Yes,
and
it
so
actually,
yeah.
For some, I have had I just have never really looked into acupuncture, and just having that information, I can actually understand what we're talking about.
Good. And so then the needles work in conjunction with each other. They talk to each other. There's different protocols that we have, and but then also what I like to remind people is that the needles themselves are not doing anything. It's the actual body. We already know how to heal ourselves. Our bodies know. They're so intelligent, and they are so innate, and we forget. Stress happens, cortisol levels rise, we don't eat, we are doing other things with food or whatever, and our bodies are trying to stay alive. And so they forget all these other things, and we develop patterns that create disease. And the needles are just reminders. We neurologically remind the body, like, hey, no, this is the synapse, this is what we're doing.
It's the language that I always use with my clients is body speak.
Yes.
It's when we're quiet,
yes,
our bodies have so much to say.
Yes, they do.
We work so hard at relationships with other people and getting that communication right. Mm-hmm. When we are finally quiet and we can listen to our body, we hear with the language of our own system.
Yes.
And trying to understand and interpret what it needs to be able to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Acupuncture has been used for numerous conditions such as pain relief, arthritis, digestive problems, mental health, headaches, sleep issues, and even quitting smoking. The evidence is strongest for its use in chronic pain management. How does acupuncture assist in the treatment of eating disorders?
So again, what I've learned in my experience with both being someone that has suffered from an eating disorder and treating people that have had them is that there is an addictive component most of the time. It's not all the time, but most of the time. And so acupuncture is actually very good at treating post-traumatic stress and addiction. There's a lot of evidence and literature out there that, and I actually worked with some veterans in Los Angeles that treating post-traumatic stress in veterans. And there's a specific protocol called the NADA protocol, and it's 5 points in the ear. And they have found that this protocol, when done consistently, really helps these veterans be able to process and live amidst their PTSD, because PTSD is very complex. It doesn't necessarily always go away, but it can be in remission. It can, there's different seasons of it, I should say. So eating disorders, I feel like, or I've noticed, are related in that way, in the sense that sometimes there's a trauma, like an abuse situation that someone has lived with, but the eating disorder itself is a trauma. It's a trauma to the body and the mind, and how we are sort of punishing ourselves. I don't want to speak for everyone. I can say for me, I was using it as a self-punishment tool. And so that itself became almost addictive, if that makes sense. And so I treat eating disorders with that same protocol, usually in the ear. But depending, again, on the patient and how their particular disorder has manifested, I do other points in conjunction. And I won't go into all of the theory, but there's different organ systems and things at play, depending on the diagnosis and all of that.
So when we're talking about addiction, we know that alcohol can be addicting. We know that drugs can be addicting. Mm-hmm. Food, there's controversy.
Yes, there is.
The fact is that every one of us are 100% dependent on food. Mm-hmm. So how do you classify food as an addiction?
So the key classification of any addiction is unmanageability of life in the midst of taking the thing. And so there are people that drink alcohol regularly, but don't necessarily classify themselves as an alcoholic. They can put it down whenever they want. Their life is manageable. They don't think about it when they put it away. With addiction, it's like after a first bite of a substance. And for me, I've noticed sugar is really, it's just this, I can't have it. I've tried, I've really, and maybe that will change. I think there's such an evolution to eating disorders and recovery.
For sure.
And so I'm not like, oh, this is in this box over here and I can't ever have it. But I've found that just one bite, I can't stop thinking about it. I need to have another. And then my life goes down the drain. I can't manage my kids' schedules. I can't wake up on time. I'm a mess. And so I think that can happen with anything. Gambling, phone use, internet, like all that stuff. If your life becomes unmanageable, that's what I would consider to be the definition.
Because there is, from your experience, and I absolutely hear that, when we are talking about scientifically proving sugar addiction, there's a lot of controversy. They look at the rats, and it's an experiment on rats, and they have been deprived, and there's a whole sequence of what goes on. So it is, I don't know that it is a black and white
It's not.
issue.
And I think nature and nurture comes into it as well. I think predispositions, like people that have alcoholism in their family, they can subsequently develop it. And I think the same kind of goes for that as well. But yes, it is a controversy for sure.
And are you familiar with the practice of intuitive eating?
Yes.
So, when we're talking about intuitive eating, addiction, acupuncture, how do all those work together?
So I think it has to do with awareness. So the person needs to show up, and I mean not just to the appointment,
right,
but
physically, mentally, emotionally.
They have to have the willingness to be open-minded and develop some self-awareness practices. I strongly suggest that they find a therapist and work with some sort of talk therapy, because cognitive behavioral therapy is very effective for this. But I'm spacing on the question, sorry.
Just the connection between acupuncture, intuitive eating,
Oh, yes.
food addiction,
Yes.
with the different thoughts.
Yes, okay. So like I said, I think intuitive eating is an end game that everyone can reach. I don't think everyone reaches it at the same time.
Oh, for sure.
So sometimes people have to treat it like, okay, this is a drug. I can't have this food right now. I don't want it. I'm going to just put it over here. My life is unmanageable. But then with consistent, like I said, CBT and acupuncture in conjunction with that, that development of self-awareness and more practices that are geared towards self-care, I think people can learn how to use food as a way of self-care. I think we are taught too often that it is not self-care. It's either indulgence, which is shame,
Guilt,
or it is abuse. It's punishment, and I think we don't talk enough about that in our society, is that how we punish ourselves with, instead of just rejoice. It's
right.
fuel.
It's the good, the bad,
Yes.
or,
Yes.
oh, I've been so good today,
Right.
which means that I'm on the path to having a better body.
Right. It always means that.
Right.
You're right.
And people don't understand the nuance of what they are actually saying
Yes.
and meaning.
Yeah.
When we're talking about acupuncture assisting in the treatment of eating disorders, how does it help?
Okay.
What's the root of that?
Yes. So no matter what you're coming in for, every acupuncture treatment is going to release natural endorphins, and it's going to interrupt any fight or flight response that you're currently in. So the fight or flight response is a heightened level of cortisol that often happens under stress. We are made as animals to be wired to survive, and that means that we run when we are feeling there's a tiger chasing us. In this day and age, there aren't usually tigers, but there are stress levels that get to that point, and sometimes people just function at this low or high level of cortisol-induced stress response. And so when they are functioning that way, our brains, they're amazing things, and their only job is to help us survive. They're not here to be logical or reason or any of that. And so they're responding to this stress level, and our monkey minds then start to go and go and go. And so people that talk about having chronic anxiety and their minds can't shut up, it's a physiological, again, electricity in the brain that's just not shutting off, because the cortisol is so high and it's telling the brain, we gotta go, we gotta
We're out of
go.
here.
And so the acupuncture interrupts that, and it sends endorphins through the body that kind of tell the brain, we're here right now. First of all, you can't run away with needles. We're not going to do that.
Not recommended.
Yeah. But we're here right now. We're going to calm down. And I've just seen so many people come in so anxious, so uptight and scared. And after their treatment, they're just like, this is, oh my gosh.
Why didn't I find this sooner?
And so I think it's that interruption, which is the start of the CBT coming in, and so that people can start to change their thinking, because it's really a lot about thinking. It's hard to change your thinking when the chemistry is not letting you, right?
Right. You can't think clearly if your mind is in chaos.
Yes. And so the acupuncture aids in that, so that the other therapies can kind of come in and it's all a conglomerate together.
Everything works together. Mm-hmm. Earlier you mentioned body dysmorphia. What are body dysmorphia and body dysphoria, and how do they relate to the eating disorders?
So body dysphoria, the general definition is severe distress in the body, like feeling like, oh, I just don't feel comfortable in my skin. I don't like how my body feels. And dysmorphia is an actual inability to see what the body looks like. So it's dysmorphed, right? It's difficult shape is basically what it means. And so someone with an eating disorder, or anyone, can look in the mirror and completely see a different image, actually really see a different image than what the world sees. Every dysmorphic person experiences dysphoria, but not every dysphoric person experiences dysmorphia. It's and they kind of are on a little bit of a spectrum as well. So the two of them, in how they relate to eating disorders, kind of come in as this perfect storm of, you are not right in your skin, you need to change something. I don't know what that is, but we're gonna use food to do that. And
You know, I can absolutely relate to both of those experiences, and you don't know it.
Yes, you don't.
You truly believe
Yeah.
what you are seeing.
Yeah,
And it is a hard road to unlearn
it is.
that thought.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And it's not a linear healing. It's just when you think you've got it managed, it creeps back in.
Yep.
And it is a lot of work to use the tools that you have, because and I don't want to use the word lazy, because that's not the right word, but you have to fight
Yeah.
to be able to use the healing modalities and the skills that you have, because it's easy to regress.
Yes. And also, again, not every day we want to wake up and let's fight. Like, it's so to give ourselves that compassion.
Tired.
Yes. And the grace of, I don't feel like it today. Not to say, oh, go and be unhealthy and use or whatever, but just to know that every day is a cookie.
Right, and that's why I didn't want to use the word lazy.
Yeah, right.
But some days you just don't have the the fight in you to keep going, and offering yourself self-compassion is one of the most useful tools that you can have and to learn. How prevalent are eating disorders, and do they disproportionately affect certain demographics?
So they affect about 9% of the world population. Demographically, they don't pick and choose, but they actually are more prevalent among higher income women, especially middle to higher income. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist in other demographics. And
They're
I think
often not diagnosed.
I was going to say, I think there's a lot of underreporting, and there's a lot of what's the word? Doctors aren't screening. They're not asking their patients. Maybe they're noticing like a weight gain or weight loss from last year at the physical, and they're not inquiring about this stuff. I don't understand it. So I think a lot of it is underreported. 9% feels low to me.
I would agree, and a lot of what I'm reading is that marginalized communities are not getting the care.
Right, and they're not being asked.
They're not being asked, and even in my own experience, and yes, as a privileged white woman, I would go to the doctor's office, and they were always so excited that I had lost weight, and you look so great, and they had no clue,
and they didn't ask you.
No.
They just assume.
And I'm like, oh yeah,
Right, of course. Why would you say this?
Like I'm getting praise for being, X.
Yeah.
Nobody had any idea, and I didn't have any idea. It was only in my personal experience that one day I got on the scale and I got really scared. And that was a defining moment for me, where I had to force myself to start eating again, because it was a choice.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate. I don't know how, but I was fortunate
I'm so happy that you did.
I was able to go in the direction that it needed to go into. But it was scary.
I was
like,
scary.
ooh, like it was great for a while, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, like what did I do?
Right.
What are some common physiological, emotional, and social drivers of eating disorders?
So physiological, I think I touched a little bit on in terms of the dysphoria stuff. Even just puberty, unfortunately, I think a lot of kids experience a little bit of a thickness around puberty. I did, and no one talked to me about it. I didn't know that was how my body was supposed to normally.
What's normal?
Exactly.
I don't want to say normal, but what is expected,
like typical. Yeah, I wasn't talked to about that. So I think physiologically, just body changes in general. And our bodies change even after puberty. Like we keep changing.
Our bodies change every day.
Constantly, yes. And so not being in touch with that, or thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm not the same as I was yesterday. And then psychologically, again, I think a lot has to do with the environment that someone's living in, whether they're a child or an adult, and who they're surrounding themselves with. Because I think psychological health has a lot to do with not just our physical environment, but our people environment. Who are you talking to? Who are you getting coffee with? Who are you are you getting angry all the time about what you're reading, or are you finding the positives and able to do that? So that, I think. And then social, again, it's such all addictions are diseases of isolation. These diseases love people to be alone, of course, because no one can see you do what you're doing. You don't have to tell anybody that you already did it. And you can sort of live with this, I don't need to get rid of this because this is all I have. And I was in that for so long. I isolated, I can't even tell you how many friends and just people that were good to me and were like, Steph, I'm done. And, I'm thankful that I had those experiences because I can see now when I start to isolate, I have that awareness. I'm noticing I'm, in my bedroom turning on Netflix a little too much, and what about reading to my kids and things like that. So, yeah.
And you have been able to, and it's something that I work a lot with my clients, is that being able to recognize it's the gift and the opportunity from the experience, and you get to choose when you have the skills to be able to say, I can learn from this, that it's not good or bad.
Right.
It's just the opportunity to be able to pause versus react.
Right, absolutely. And respond too, I think. I had to learn that too, is the difference between react and respond.
100%.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. You briefly mentioned in your story about trauma. So what role does trauma play in eating disorders?
So trauma is tricky. It is very subjective, so it's difficult to measure it on a scale, okay? But that doesn't mean that it's worse in one person than another person. Everyone has their own relative subjective experience to trauma. It's what it does to the brain that I think it relates to not only eating disorders, but addictions. And so, like I said, the brain's not interested in rationalizing, it's interested in keeping our bodies alive. And so in the face of trauma, when we have been hurt physically, sexually, psychologically, our brains wire themselves in a way to protect us from the memories of that, because we can't run from the tiger if we're sitting in that memory. So the way that our brain wires itself is to find other mechanisms to escape that memory. And so that's how the self-using or starvation or bulimia, it's all this drug really because I talked about sugar being a drug, but really the disorders themselves are the drug. Control is the crux of the drug, right? And so you can get addicted to starving yourself. You can get addicted to purging and things like that. And I think that's a really, really scary thing. But again, it's that the brain sort of giving your body a way to, or your mind a way to escape the memory of the trauma. So I think that's how trauma plays a role in these developments.
How can treatment be trauma-informed?
So trauma-informed, that's sort of a new buzzword, I think, among practitioners these days. And some of it has to do with continuing education and what types of actual training these people have. And some of it actually is innate. Some practitioners really understand trauma. They have not taken a class on it. It's okay. They don't have to have letters behind their names. They understand it at this human level. And so trauma-informed just means, are you asking your patients the right questions? Are you aware of what their family is like? I ask pretty much all of my patients, except the ones that have actually asked me not to anymore. I ask how their families are, how's life at home? All of that is just this holistic approach to being trauma-informed, because just because someone has experienced trauma in their childhood doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it elsewhere,
today, right.
Or just one incident, and they might not want to, they're ashamed to talk about it. We need to ask, we need to see, why are they coming in right now and their anxiety's through the roof? What happened?
It's really finding a practitioner that knows how to hold space,
Yes.
ask those questions, offer empathy, all about curiosity, removing the judgment, and really coming from the heart of no harm.
Yes.
What are some early warning signs and red flags for spotting eating disorders?
So those are a little bit difficult because they're nuanced, and I think people get really good at hiding. In kids, it's a little different than adults. So kids, sometimes they're very, very subtle. So how are they looking at a TV? If you're looking at a TV show and you see bodies on the screen and there's this beautiful, whatever, girl coming down on the screen, how is the kid looking at that? Are they staring at her? Are they those little nuances are really easy to miss, but they're there. And then how are they eating? Are they like going for all the pastries, or are they going for veggies? Are they eating more frequently? Do they seem sad? Do they seem anxious? I think with kids, a lot of it, once we know how to look for it, becomes really obvious. But I think a lot of people just don't know how to look for it. In adults, I think it's hard to pinpoint the nature of how they are beginning if you don't sit down and like eat regularly with an adult and see them with the food, how they maybe push things around on their plate and they're not really eating too much, or they're shoveling it in.
Eliminating food groups.
Yes.
Making choices in the name. There's a lot of confusion between wellness and dieting.
Yes.
Oh, it's all because of my health. And that's not always really
right.
That's not the truth.
And orthorexia is on the rise, which is basically the newer eating disorder of people only eating healthy foods. They will not eat anything else, like no cookie, no alcohol, like nothing. And it's a disorder. So there's some people that just choose that, and that's fine. And you can see that. You can see that in people. But there are other people that are like, no, I can't touch that. I can't.
Right. It's the rigidity.
Yes.
It is the stress level when there's nothing offered.
Yes.
The ability to skip meals because it doesn't meet
right.
what the expectation is.
Yes.
When I work with my clients, I like to use the word prefer. You could prefer to be plant-based. You could prefer to eat X, Y, Z. When you use the prefer word, you're not in a box of that perfectionism, which can really lead you down a really challenging path.
I like that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, it's something that I have been able to use personally that has shifted my ability to eat more things, because there's always so much judgment, because I was the person who only ate X, Y, Z, and you're so good, you only do this, you only do that.
Yeah.
And now I can say, well, I prefer this, but when my parents bring up a kosher hot dog from New Jersey that comes from the most amazing deli, I don't feel guilty for wanting it and having a couple of bites of it.
Right.
It still doesn't make me feel good to eat the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the fact that I can now enjoy a few bites, where for years
that's huge.
It was nope, I don't even want it on my plate.
Yeah.
So
that's huge.
the prefer has been a really freeing word for me, and I see how it helps my clients as well.
Yeah.
How do you recommend combining acupuncture with other treatments for optimal results?
I think I actually like physical medicine. So acupuncture, even massage. So a lot of people with eating disorders don't like to be touched, myself included. But massage therapy is one of those, just a gentle massage or something that sort of allows the senses to kind of be in the present moment and take us out of the mind. And then when it's time, go into the mind and go find a really good therapist. I do really like cognitive behavioral therapy. I also love EMDR, which is kind of on the rise. I use that myself. And then there's something called internal family systems,
IFS,
which is amazing.
Parts.
Parts work. That has helped me the most. I have to say, the CBT is great in terms of giving me tools and practices, but the parts work really developed my sense of awareness and and how my brain is responding to different situations, and that it also stimulated self-compassion. Like, oh, look at my anger self is angry, like she's driving the boat,
Right.
So
yeah, we talk a lot. I just had a recent guest on who is an expert on mindful eating, and she's also a therapist and focuses a lot on IFS. And I've noticed my clients that work with practitioners during our conversation that they're being able to label where this information is coming from, how it's being used, and to be able to offer that compassion to create the shifts and the change. It's a really powerful modality.
It really is. I can speak for personal experience. It's amazing.
What advice would you give someone considering acupuncture for an eating disorder?
I would advise on consistency more than anything. I think sometimes people see acupuncture as like a once and done. Oh, I did it. It's such a, like I said before, our bodies are doing the healing, the work. The needles are just reminding it, but the body's going to forget again, and so the effects of acupuncture really only last from like 24 to 72 hours. And then you kind of have to go, you don't need to go like every 3 days, but once a week gets the body into a rhythm to sort of learn how to remember a little bit better. And then eventually you can wean off. But I have to say, I have patients that have come in for certain things, and then they've come once a week, and then they realize I'm helping them with something else that they didn't even know they wanted help with. And now they just come because it's part of their lifestyle. And those are the patients that flourish in every area of their life. They just make it a part of their lifestyle, and they don't miss it, and they're thriving.
So interesting. So it is, everything we do is a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing is that through acupuncture, our body is always practicing getting back into like that homeostasis type of, space that we all want to be in. And the needles are the reminder, but the body can start to do it with that reminder to be able to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And regular check-ins kind of keep you in balance.
Yes. And they keep you accountable. I mean, just the bread and butter of addiction, right, is isolation. And so, no, I have a treatment today. And so that changes the trajectory of how.
Yeah, it's isolation. So I refer to it as social nourishment.
Yes, yeah.
Social nourishment, I see that more often in anything when I'm talking to my clients on where their challenges are coming from. That the lack of connection shows up in eating disorders, disordered eating, pain, contentment.
Right.
It's one of the most underrated tools that we have that we really need to start focusing on, I think, as a community on how to heal that.
Yeah.
How accessible and affordable is acupuncture for eating disorders?
It depends. So there's different types of business models. I have a private practice, and so it's a little bit higher in terms of the price point, but you get a lot more one-on-one, and there's a lot more like outside of just the treatment that I do, and I give people work to do and things like that. And then there are some insurances that can cover a little bit, but Massachusetts doesn't have too many, and so it still can be a little bit an expense. There's also a community model, which is actually comes from China and Asia, where there are maybe 10 or so recliners in one room, and there's one practitioner, maybe two, and everyone just lines up and sits in there, and they tell them all their stuff, and then the practitioners go and needle them, and you can see like 6 patients an hour.
Wow.
I've worked in that model before. I don't think there's any problem with it if the patient likes it. I personally wanted to spend more time with my people, and so I decided private practice was better for me. But there are other, and then so the community model is a lot cheaper because of that. You're sharing the space.
And it makes it accessible to more people.
Yes.
And you can use an HSA or an FSA for acupuncture?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that's an important thing to, really to let people know, because it's not just black and white, that there's other ways in which you can start to be able to pay for healthcare, which can be so challenging at times.
Yeah.
Are there any risks of using acupuncture as an eating disorder treatment?
I would say no out front, but there could be a risk of relying on it being the only thing that you need. I wouldn't want to tout that. I think that we call it CAM, complementary and alternative medicine. That first word, complementary, insinuates that we are doing it amongst other modalities. And so I believe in integrative medicine over anything. I am not all acupuncture or all Western. I think both sides come together very beautifully when they're allowed to. So a holistic approach of, mind, body, spirit. Yeah.
I love that. Everything is so interconnected with our health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
How can someone find a qualified acupuncturist specializing in eating disorders?
I don't, in terms of specializing in eating disorders, I don't know too many, but you can go on, there are certain databases. Acupuncture Today is a journal that has a website that you can look up practitioners by state. The practitioners don't always list their specialties, and most of them specialize in things like pain or even oncology care and things like that, palliative care. So I haven't personally come across too many eating disorder specialists, but who knows?
Clearly there is a need.
Yeah, yes, there
And,
is.
you know, just the fact that you're so clear that this is not the cure-all,
Right.
that this is a supporting modality and one of many that people need to go through to be able to foster their healing journey.
Yes. Yes.
Before you share this week's practice, are there any other words of wisdom that you would like to share?
I think trust your body and trust your mind. I think that our bodies and our minds give us all kinds of messages. Some of them are baloney. A lot of them are truth and beauty and rich. And so to kind of welcome those in and not be afraid to feel different sensations or think other things that maybe pop into your mind, and explore them with a loving kindness to yourself.
Compassion
Yes.
is, you know, we talk about compassion all the time. Asking yourself, what am I feeling? What do I need?
Yeah.
And is this really true?
Yeah. And to also, like I said, just that word trust, just be able to trust ourselves when something doesn't feel right. It's probably not right. You know, we can explore that a little bit. And
Intuition is a real thing.
yes, yes.
So tell me, what practice do you have for us today?
So I have square breathing. Square breathing is like an interruption for anxiety, like we talked about the high cortisol levels. Whenever we're in that fight or flight response, or we're feeling like just, oh, I just want to do something that's going to take away this edge, we can stop, and it can take 30 seconds. You can do it for 10 minutes if you want. But it's basically breathing in the shape of a square. So you're going to inhale for 4 seconds, and then hold the breath for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold the breath again for 4 seconds. And you just keep doing that until you feel sort of more of the anxiety kind of coming down. And what that's really doing is you're getting an influx of oxygen, and you're holding it so that your brain sort of gets this flood of blood, oxygen-filled blood, which brings down all of that cortisol and everything in the, yeah.
And it's something that you can do, as you said, for 30 seconds, a minute. People can't sleep at night. Is this something?
Great. Yes.
This is,
Great
I mean,
tool.
this is one of my tools that
Yeah.
I struggle with sleeping.
Yeah.
And this is one of my go-to and it makes such a
It's
difference.
like a reset, and you can't do it too much. You can do it all day.
And you can't get hurt.
You can't get hurt,
You
right?
can't get hurt.
Yeah.
So thank you. You know, it's just been such an incredible experience talking with you.
Thank you.
Today we learned that eating disorders are complex conditions with addictive components that require a multifaceted, trauma-informed treatment approach. Acupuncture shows promise as a complementary therapy to help address the root causes and addictive patterns of disordered eating by regulating brain chemistry and energy flows and inducing deep relaxation. When combined with talk therapy, nutrition support, and addressing body image issues, acupuncture can support recovery from chronic eating disorders. If you would like to continue the conversations, please join me for my monthly office hours conversations, and I always welcome learning more about you through email. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Getting Healthy Without Rules.